Welcome. You have shared a stack of sources with us concerning one of the most enduring, complex, and high-profile missing persons cases of the early 21st century.
That's right, the vanishing of Patrick McDermott.
And this isn't just a story about someone disappearing. It's a masterclass in how proximity to celebrity, financial desperation, and just profoundly strange circumstances can keep a mystery alive for decades.
Long after the official entities have closed their files.
Exactly.
And that's really the core conflict we need to address for you today. Our goal is to move far beyond the sensational tabloid headlines, the ones that have really dominated this narrative since 2005.
So we're going to conduct a really thorough exploration.
A very thorough one. We're synthesizing the known biographical facts, the details of the Vanishing Act itself, which are almost unbelievable when you lay them out.
They really are.
And then you have the subsequent decades of just deeply conflicting investigations, both official and private. So when we finish, you'll understand not just what happened, but more importantly, why this case just continues to generate so much heat.
The subject, of course, is Patrick McDermott. He was born September 18th, 1956. And the core event we're examining is his disappearance on June 30th, 2005, off the coast of Los Angeles.
And what made this case explode globally, and what has sustained the intrigue all the way into 2026, is that crucial connection.
The Olivia Newton-John connection.
Yes. McDermott was the on-and-off partner of the late cultural icon, Olivia Newton-John, for about 9 years right before he vanished.
That celebrity connection, it just acts as a gravitational center, doesn't it? It pulls in every piece of unsubstantiated rumor and gives it a sort of credibility it wouldn't otherwise have.
It absolutely does. And for you, the learner, we're going to focus on those intricate details the average person probably wouldn't know. The legal distinctions, the specific debts, the failed technological traps. We're striving for comprehensive coverage that really spans his entire biography right up to the current legally ambiguous status of the case today.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, because McDermott's origins, his personal history, it feels like it provides the very foundation for all the later speculation.
It absolutely does.
Like, it raises the question, was the man who vanished capable of just inventing a completely new life?
That is the question. And his earliest years are essential context. Patrick McDermott was born in Seoul, South Korea, September 18th, 1956.
And his birth name was Kim Chong-nam.
Kim Chong-nam. And that original identity it's far more than a simple footnote. It becomes a key, almost a manipulative piece of evidence in the later claims made by private investigators.
The claims about him resurfacing in Mexico.
Exactly.
And the adoption story is crucial to this idea of a fluid identity, right?
Yeah.
Misplaced for adoption by his Korean mother, then adopted by an American family when he was just 2 years old.
And while the records are clear, he was adopted. He got a new name. McDermott himself later stated he believed he was born to a Korean mother and an American father.
So there's already this history of identity transformation.
Precisely. Moving between cultures, accepting a new name, a new family, it establishes a psychological precedent.
How so?
Well, it allows those who push the hoax theory to argue that reinvention was a familiar concept to him. It's not just a man running away, it's a man potentially reverting to an earlier, discarded identity structure.
So if you've already successfully changed who you are once,
Then the leap to faking your death becomes psychologically less daunting. It's not as big of a jump.
okay. So beyond his origins, what about his professional life?
It was largely freelance. His primary occupation was as a cameraman. He often worked in lighting design, which is actually what he was doing when he met Olivia Newton-John around 1996.
And the freelance nature of that work is significant too.
It is. It means he didn't have a rigid 9-to-5 existence. There's no single employer or office full of colleagues who would notice an untraceable exit immediately.
Right. And then there's the domestic context, his family life.
He had been married previously to an actress named Yvette Nipar back in 1992. They divorced around 1994.
And they have one son, Chance McDermott.
Yes. And this marriage and the subsequent divorce is what really structures the financial pressures that become so central to the motive.
Let's talk about that financial strain, because it really is the crucial point for all the later speculation.
It's everything. McDermott filed for bankruptcy in the year 2000.
5 years before he disappeared.
5 years. So that suggests a chronic instability, not just a sudden monetary setback. A bankruptcy filing like that, especially for a freelancer, just creates a long paper trail of ongoing debt and failure to meet obligations.
But there was a more immediate pressure point, wasn't there?
There was. The debt that many investigators later claimed was the reason he faked his death was overdue child support
Par.
to Yvette Par. At the time of his disappearance in June 2005, he was under a court order to pay it.
And do we know how much it was?
The amount reported by private investigators was around $8,000 US.
$8,000, which, you have to ask the question, is that enough money to drive someone to orchestrate this complex, high-stakes disappearance?
Yeah.
To commit a federal crime, essentially?
It seems like an imbalance, certainly. But it likely wasn't just the $8,000. It was the combination of everything.
The chronic instability from the bankruptcy.
Yes, the public relationship with a wealthy celebrity, which adds its own pressure, and then the immediate, legally binding force of that child support order.
Because missing a child support payment means facing the court.
It means facing the court, potentially jail time, and certainly public shame related to his son. So the $8,000 wasn't the entire burden, but it was the catalyst. It was the thing that forced a confrontation he might have wanted to avoid at all costs.
So we have a man with a history of adopting new identities, a flexible job, and acute financial and legal pressure.
That's the psychological backdrop for the Vanishing Act.
Okay, so now let's get to the actual events of June 30th, 2005. Because this part of the timeline is it's riddled with bizarre details.
And a massive procedural gap that fundamentally complicates any official conclusion. It's a mess.
The setting was the fishing charter boat, the Freedom. It was a 75-foot vessel.
And the trip was a standard 22-hour overnight fishing trip. It departed from the San Pedro Marina just off the coast of L.A.
Now, McDermott was a regular on these trips, wasn't he?
He's a frequent client, so this familiarity is key. He would have known the routines, the passenger flow, what the crew did and didn't do.
And critically, he booked the trip solo.
He did not know any of the other 22 passengers or crew members on board the Freedom.
So he was totally isolated.
Which makes his subsequent disappearance entirely unobserved. If he wanted to slip away unnoticed, he chose the perfect setting and the perfect companions, strangers who would not be tracking his every move.
And this brings us to the fundamental procedural failure, the discovery of his absence.
It was severely and, you could argue, fatally delayed. The most critical fact that the Coast Guard investigation later focused on was the lack of a mandatory head count.
No head count when the boat got back to the marina.
None. The crew just gate. They failed to confirm that all 22 passengers had actually gotten off the boat. So McDermott's physical absence was not noticed by anyone. Not a single person connected to that trip.
The realization only came, 6 days later?
6 days later, July 6, 2005. He failed to show up for a scheduled family event, and that's when the alarm bells finally started to ring. 6 full days passed between when he was last seen and when anyone realized he was missing.
That 6-day gap is catastrophic for any kind of search and rescue.
Oh, absolutely. By the time anyone sounded the alarm, the ocean currents could have carried any trace of him for hundreds of miles. He was officially reported missing on July 11th.
But the story didn't really hit the press until even later.
It didn't get widespread coverage for another month, in August 2005. That's when Olivia Newton-John hired a private investigator to look into it. The delay just allowed the narrative to be shaped entirely by speculation, because any hard evidence from the boat was long gone.
But the most tangible, lasting evidence came from what he left behind.
This is the ultimate paradox of the case.
Let's focus on those belongings, because they're so important. His car keys, his passport, and his wallet.
All found still on the Freedom after everyone else had left. And on top of that, his car was found parked securely near the marina where he'd left it.
The implications of leaving those specific items, that's what fuels the entire hoax theory, isn't it?
It's the engine of it. If he had accidentally fallen overboard, a tragedy, it's highly unlikely he would have taken the time to neatly stow his passport and wallet and keys.
Right. And if it were suicide, why not just go overboard with your wallet or leave a note?
Exactly. The presence of the passport especially just screams premeditation. Leaving official, verifiable identity documents behind is step one in faking a death.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a body were recovered later and it was unrecognizable, the Coast Guard would search for a missing passenger matching the manifest. They'd check his belongings, find the passport, and it confirms his identity.
It supports the conclusion that Patrick McDermott was definitively lost at sea.
It closes the door. It removes the need for him to ever resurface as Patrick McDermott. The car keys confirm he never intended to drive home, but the car itself ensures it wouldn't be reported stolen for days.
If you believe the vanishing was calculated, it's an almost perfectly executed piece of theater.
It is. It created the illusion of a man who just vanished into the sea, with all his essential records left behind to cement the official verdict of tragedy.
Which would free him to start a new life, possibly as Pat Kim, using an identity created before the trip.
That calculated exit theory is just so much more compelling than a simple accident, precisely because of the inventory of items left on that boat. It suggested foresight, preparation, and a real understanding of the bureaucracy that would follow.
So we have the man, the motive, and these strange circumstances. Now let's move into the official response. The U.S. Coast Guard's findings. They provided a kind of administrative closure, but their contradictory nature certainly didn't provide public closure.
Not at all. And it's vital to distinguish between the two separate inquiries the Coast Guard conducted. They were parallel, but with different purposes.
Okay, what was the first one?
The first was the Coast Guard Investigative Service case. That focused on the disappearance itself. It was looking for evidence of criminal activity, suicide, or a hoax.
The What Happened to McDermott investigation?
Exactly. And that case closed on September 15, 2006, just over a year after he vanished.
And their finding was bafflingly specific.
It was. The report stated it did not find any evidence of criminal action, suicide, accident, or hoax in the disappearance of McDermott.
They found no evidence of anything.
They essentially erased all definitive conclusions. To find no evidence of crime, suicide, or hoax is one thing. That means no smoking gun. But to also rule out accident suggests that even the simplest, most tragic explanation couldn't be definitively proven.
They just ruled out every narrative.
Every narrative that requires affirmative proof, yes.
So what was the second inquiry?
That was the Marine Safety investigation. This one focused on the operations of the vessel itself, the Freedom.
Looking at things like safety protocols, crew competence.
Right. Did the lack of a head count constitute a regulatory failure, that kind of thing? And that investigation closed much later, on October 30, 2008.
So after 3 years and 2 extensive investigations, what was the final joint conclusion?
The joint conclusion from the Coast Guard was that McDermott was likely lost at sea.
Okay, but here's the core challenge. If they couldn't find evidence of an accident or suicide or a hoax, how could they still conclude he was likely lost at sea? That phrase just seems to fly in the face of their own findings.
That finding is the bureaucratic default.
Yeah.
It's an administrative necessity to close the file.
A default.
Yes. When a person is known to have been on a vessel, they're not accounted for upon return, and there's no evidence of foul play or a confirmed exit, the conclusion is likely lost at sea.
So it's a statement of probability, not verified fact.
Precisely. It means they exhausted their official resources and couldn't prove any specific theory, so they defaulted to the statistically most probable fate for a person missing from a boat in the open ocean.
It provides legal finality, maybe for insurance or declaring someone deceased, but offers absolutely zero psychological comfort or certainty.
And that ambiguity is the perfect breeding ground for further investigation. That void was immediately exploited by the media.
The case was featured on America's Most Wanted.
Which is a testament to the belief that he was potentially alive and on the run. That one show shifted the entire public narrative from a maritime tragedy, a sad, resolved incident, to a fugitive mystery, an active pursuit.
And that kept the story alive and gave license to private investigators to really pursue that debt motive.
Aggressively.
Since the Coast Guard only provided that default conclusion, the private sector and the media really seized on the financial details.
They did, and this raises that important question. Why did private investigators find the hoax theory so compelling when the USCG had formally ruled out evidence of one?
The focus shifts entirely to debt avoidance.
Completely. The debt motive, as small as it might have seemed on the surface, became the primary justification. Investigators were adamant that McDermott disappeared specifically to avoid his debts, zeroing in on that $8,000 for child support.
And this is where major media organizations start funding their own investigations.
Yes. A feature commissioned by Dateline NBC in 2009 was transformative. It just completely changed the narrative. They hired investigators who went undercover, convinced he was hiding in Mexico.
And their method was quite sophisticated for the time.
It was. They created a bespoke website, findpatrickmcdermott.com. The stated purpose was to locate him, but the actual function was a digital trap.
Pure cyberbait.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The methodology was to log and map all visitors' IP addresses. They operated on the assumption that even if he was in deep hiding, he, or someone close to him, would eventually search online for news about the case and click on the site.
So they were trying to capture the digital echo of a man trying to be invisible.
Exactly. By tracking geographical spikes in traffic, they hoped to pinpoint a localized area where he might be operating.
And by 2009, they were publicly confident.
Very confident. The Dateline investigators believed he was living on a boat off the west coast of Mexico, and they just kept tracking hits to their website using that data to narrow their search.
And they also backed this up with anecdotal evidence, right? Sightings.
They did. The investigators claimed they'd received over 20 sightings of McDermott reported across Mexico and Central America.
Now, eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable.
Very unreliable. But when you have 20 separate individuals claiming to see a man fitting his description in a specific geographical corridor, and that corridor aligns with your IP tracking data.
The belief in the hoax theory just gains enormous momentum.
And huge public credence. The picture they drew was undeniable for those who believed it. He wasn't a victim of the sea. He was a resourceful fugitive operating just south of the border, avoiding his obligations.
And this shift led to a massive escalation. The speculation just peaked when private investigators began claiming direct contact.
And this ignited a public feud over credibility that just tore apart any final certainty in the case.
The central figure here was an investigator named Philip Klein.
Philip Klein, a Texas-based PI, his initial allegations starting in January 2009 were blunt. He said McDermott was alive and well in Mexico and was asking to be left alone.
Which suggests communication had occurred.
It does. But his claims got far more detailed in April 2009. He released a formal statement. He said his firm received a fax on February 10, 2009. A fax from a small city near Acapulco in the state of Guerrero.
And what did he claim was in it?
He said that after investigating the origin, they established phone contact with a representative of McDermott. Not McDermott himself, but an intermediary that they found credible.
So they're in negotiations.
He publicly announced they were in active negotiations, promising a formal statement through Dateline NBC at the proper time.
And the investigation seemed to culminate a year later, in April 2010.
It did. Klein's team alleged they had finally located McDermott, alive, living near the Mexican Pacific coast near Puerto Vallarta.
And this is where the biographical history comes back in a big way.
A very big way. They claimed he was living under his birth name, but modified.
Pat Kim.
Pat Kim. It's a critical connection back to his origins. Using Pat Kim leverages his Korean birth name, Kim Chong-nam, and his adopted American name, Patrick. It suggests a man merging his identities for his new life.
A very compelling narrative for the public.
And they claimed this location was tracked using the IP addresses, logging onto their website. They were claiming their technological trap had finally worked.
The sources even mention a bizarre detail where McDermott allegedly offered a DNA sample to prove he was alive.
He did, or they claimed he did. Offering DNA suggests a level of confidence, maybe even testing the legal waters of being found. But the crucial question of whether that sample was ever provided, much less verified, is left wide open.
So you have this PR storm, the successful private investigator versus the quiet, resigned U.S. Coast Guard.
But that triumphant narrative immediately collided with McDermott's ex-wife, Yvette Napar.
She publicly and vehemently disputed Klein's claims.
Vehemently. She framed the whole thing as exploitative. In March 2012, she took the extraordinary step of writing directly to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos.
Why?
She was asking him to halt the promotion and sales of Klein's book about the case, Lost at Sea.
And her statement was powerful.
Incredibly powerful. She called Klein a well-known serial liar, seeking fame at the expense of her family's tragedy. She argued that despite his repeated promises of proof, he never provided anything whatsoever to verify his claims. No DNA, no verifiable image, just faxes and anonymous phone calls.
And the emotional stake was her son.
Yes, her primary concern was the impact on their son, Chance McDermott. She said the constant public resurrection of the hoax theory was inflicting emotional torment and preventing her son from being able to move on.
So you're left with two completely irreconcilable positions.
Completely. On one side, a private investigator claiming detailed, verified contact and selling that story to the media. On the other, the ex-wife, who shared a child with the man, claiming the entire thing was a cynical, profitable lie. And at different times, both narratives were publicly accepted as fact.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the case really is a stark demonstration of how quickly speculation can outpace verifiable fact.
Especially when a high-profile name like Olivia Newton-John is involved. The search for Patrick McDermott, it really evolved from a humanitarian concern into an industry.
An industry that thrived on continuous, often baseless claims.
Exactly. Sightings, new identities, it just kept going.
This was particularly intense in the Australian media, wasn't it? Because of Newton-John's status there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Even years after the initial flurry of U.S. investigative claims, Australian publications just kept pushing the fugitive Mexico narrative.
There was an example in 2016.
Yes, over a decade after he vanished. The Australian Weekly Woman's Day claimed that new investigators had found McDermott healthy and alive in Sayulita, Mexico, living with a new girlfriend.
But none of these claims were ever substantiated.
Never. They captured massive attention, but never with definitive, verifiable proof.
And the cycle repeated again in November 2017.
It did. The independent newspaper in the UK and another Australian weekly, New Idea, reported they had received photographs from a U.S. media agency called Coleman Rayner.
And these photos supposedly showed a man matching McDermott's description.
With a woman, yes. This was presented as the latest visual proof that the fugitive was still successfully hiding out in Mexico.
This was probably the most significant visual evidence provided in the later years.
It was, and it generated a huge amount of discussion. But this specific thread, the one with tangible visual proof, came to a very definitive and, for the tabloids, embarrassing conclusion.
The disproof.
The definitive disproofs. It happened shortly after the photo was circulated. On January 2, 2018, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation published a story.
And what was in it?
A man from Manitoba, Canada, identified himself and his wife as the genuine subjects of that 2017 tabloid photo.
So it was just a clear, decisive case of mistaken identification.
Completely. The man from Manitoba provided enough proof to show the photo was not of Patrick McDermott in Mexico. It just dismantled the latest, most tangible claim of life and underscored how easily media outlets could confuse sensationalism with basic verification.
So what is the current status of the man who vanished twice? Once from the boat, and then repeatedly from the grasp of investigators. As of today, January 14th, 2026, where does it stand?
The duality of the case remains frozen in place.
So officially,
the U.S. Coast Guard investigations concluded he was likely lost at sea. That is the administrative and legal position. It provides finality for insurance, and it rules out criminal responsibility.
but set against that,
You have 2 decades of unsubstantiated claims, often monetized by the investigators and media outlets who benefited from the mystery, all alleging he's alive in Mexico under an assumed identity to avoid his debts.
So legally, Patrick McDermott remains a missing person.
A file that has never been definitively closed.
So we've navigated the entire history, from his personal history and financial pressures through the truly bizarre evidence of his belongings left on the Freedom, and then through decades of these conflicting, commercially driven investigations.
And the essential paradox is that the finality the Coast Guard sought, that clean bureaucratic resolution suggesting a tragic accident, it was immediately negated by this persistent, profit-driven industry of alleged sightings.
An industry that was constantly fueled by the initial financial pressure and the strange circumstances of his documents being left behind.
Exactly. The public's imagination could never reconcile a simple drowning with a man who leaves his passport and keys on deck. It just doesn't add up for most people.
It's a case where the lack of a body and the presence of a celebrity created an infinite loop of speculation.
It did. But we have to reiterate that the price of that speculation is borne by those closest to the center of the mystery, the people who actually need closure.
We have to return to the lasting impact of his absence on those he left behind, specifically his son, Chance.
Indeed. His mother, Yvette Nipar, highlighted that profound emotional toll. She said her son had suffered enough torment and desperately needed to be able to move on to accept the loss.
So the final thought here is, when private investigators, driven by commerce and publicity, continually promise this sensational closure, the thrill of proving the hoax, how deeply does that impede the simple, necessary human act of grieving an uncertain loss?
When the facts are purposefully obscured by conflicting and self-serving reports, true emotional resolution becomes nearly impossible for the people who loved him.
Thanks for listening.